Welcome to the Visually Hidden Selects podcast, where we discuss an independent approach to the art of cinema and explore the subtext of various featured films. My name is Peter O'Brien, and I am an independent filmmaker, author, and musician.
My name is Bendler. I'm a film and stage actor and a pop culture enthusiast.
I'm Anne Milleville, a French screenwriter and producer.
Terminator is our VHS selection this week, and so that's really where our conversation is going to focus. But it is a great film because of a number of reasons. The story, the effects, albeit a little bit dated. I think without them, we wouldn't have gotten the effects of the later film.
I wanted to talk to you about special effects because these days I paid more attention to special effects thanks to you guys, because this late month, I watched more science fiction and horror movies than I never did before. I noticed that sometimes you have enormous budget on movies and you're quite disappointed about what you can see on screen. You can think that over time the quality would improve, but I can find other movies, older movies, with better special effects. And when I say special effects, I'm talking about everything, the robotics you can find in the movies, the makeup, but also the visually effects made by computer. So I was wondering how you feel as viewers and filmmakers about that, especially when you compare with an older movies. For example, my favorite movie is The Fifth Element by Luc Besson. So it was made in the 90s. And when I compare with nowadays movies, sometimes it's as good as the recent movies, or even better, so it's quite surprising.
For me personally, being a child of the 80s/90s, I am always partial to practical effects, special effects. I mean, and that's not to say that CGI hasn't done some great things and that it doesn't have its place. For me personally, I just think the practical effects always look more tangible. To me, it's just a better feel and a better vibe for the film if you can really have a lot of really cool practical effects.
Yeah, I think when people hear the term special effects or visual effects, as a filmmaker, for me, there's a very clear distinction. And the way it usually works is a visual effect is something that is computer generated, is something that was created after the fact. A special effect is something that is practical, that was created at the time of filming, and it was supervised or engineered on the set that day. And a visual effect is something that they thought about well in advance and worked on well after shooting. So it's like a displaced effect. With regard to your question, though, how do I feel about them?
Yeah.
How do I feel about them with regard to their quality? I mean, you're right. A lot of times it does come down to the budget. You can make really spectacular things with no budget if you have the skills, if you have the tools and the talent. Then you can really accomplish just about anything. But sometimes, people need to hide their mistakes, and they do it with razzle dazzle. I know for me, especially as an independent filmmaker, practical effects are always preferred, simply because, one, there's an art to it. Two, there's the fun of doing it and executing it and filming it. And three, you don't always have the budget to hire somebody to create it for you after the fact, or to digitize it. And I know now they make a lot of packages that are like, oh, you want an explosion? Here's an explosion package. You just drop this in your timeline and you're good to go. Or, oh, you want a lot of like gunfights and muzzle shots and blood spatter? Here's some digital. And I hate digital blood. It's the weakest and laziest thing in filmmaking as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. Fake blood is the worst. My second most hated is fake fire. But yeah, they're awful.
On the other hand, there are films like Avatar that are on an alien world that we will never know and we will never visit. And so in that regard, it's like, okay, well, yeah, like I'm along for the ride, but the actors are still there integrating with the environment. I give James Cameron a ton of credit for being able to figure out a way to film his imagination. That is my big takeaway from it. How do you film between your ears? And he found a way. So bravo. But for me, I don't think it's ever going to, like, no matter what happens in the Avatar sequels, I don't think it's ever going to come close to the storytelling that he achieved earlier in his career. And I'm talking specifically now about The Terminator, which is our film today. It was our VHS selection this week. And for me, even though some of the stuff, especially with the animatronics, is a little primitive, it was refined over the course of the series. And specifically, I mean, it peaked in 1991 with Terminator 2. I feel like that movie, in terms of its effects, is flawless for what it was trying to achieve and what it accomplished. But the Terminator for me is always, it's 1A and 1B. And I'm sorry for Terminator 2 fans, but like if I'm going to Mars and I only have room on the shelf for one Terminator movie, I'm taking part one, because that's the one that I need. That's the one that I revisit. And again, as an independent filmmaker in love with practical effects, that's the one I'm going to study. That's the one I'm going to learn from the most. That's the one I'm going to benefit from the most. And Terminator 2, as great as it is, every time I watch it, I still love it. But in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking like, well, this is just part one again. It's like beat for beat, the same movie, just a little bit enhanced here and there. I mean, there's so many parallels between them that it's not really taking it in a different direction, the way The Empire Strikes Back took Star Wars in a different direction, or Temple of Doom took Indiana Jones in a different direction. And you can argue that there are similar beats in those as well, but I feel like the connection between those two is a little too close.
I don't know if I completely agree that it's beat for beat. I mean, there's definitely echoings, obviously, clearly, because it's that theme also that history repeats itself, right? So they failed the first time. They can't take Sarah out. Okay, fine. Let's take a shot at John.
I'm going to describe a movie and you tell me which one I'm talking about. The Warriors show up from the future.
Uh-huh.
They find their objective.
Okay.
They converge on their objective at the same time.
Uh-huh.
And then a chase ensues in which the target finds out what's going on. Then there's a big dramatic shootout at some type of facility where they escape. And then they kind of go on the lam for a little bit. And then they come back around for their final conflict and final confrontation, which ends in
a factory.
In a factory where the bad guy is killed by his own makings.
Yeah.
Which one am I talking about?
It's both. But
okay.
Right, but what I'm saying is the message and subtext of everything that's in the second one is not in the first one. So that's why it's a different film.
Well, and I'm not talking about the film or the message. I'm talking about the story.
Oh yeah, right. It's like they got to take another shot at John, right? And they're obviously they're going to go back to what works. And
I'm not saying I hate Terminator 2. I almost practically, I worship part one, but I really, really like part two.
Yeah. And I see why you worship part one, because it really is a fantastic movie. For the original Terminator, I think maybe I was 5 or 6 the first time I saw it. So it didn't, it probably scared the hell out of me, but it didn't really hold my attention as something I wanted to go back and watch at that age. It just didn't, for whatever reason. Then when Terminator 2 came out, that's the one I grew up with. So I've seen Terminator 2 far more times than I've seen the original. It's like a nostalgia thing, Also, my grandfather would take these long walks at night, and we go to the candy store, and on the counter at the time was the box of Terminator 2 trading cards, and he'd buy me a pack. So I have the complete series of those cards. So there's some nostalgia mixed up with that stuff for me. So Terminator 2 will always be the preference for me. I mean, I've seen the first one now a bunch of times, but for this conversation, I watched it twice. It's a fucking great movie. It's a great movie, and I used to blanketly say that Terminator 2 was better than Terminator 1. I don't know that that's a fair comparison. I really feel that they're two different types of films. So in my mind, the way I see it, Terminator 1 is more of a horror sci-fi, where Terminator 2 is more of an action sci-fi. And for my money, whether it's intended or not, you can feel the inspiration of Halloween and John Carpenter. You've got this unstoppable killer chasing this woman. And then you've got this guy who's like the protector doing all the exposition, which is, a thankless fucking job, right? And like in Kyle Reese and Sam Loomis. So Terminator 1, upon revisiting it, it's all the things that I really have grown to appreciate in a film, not just a sci-fi film, but a film in general, right? It's great storytelling. It's great acting. It's great effects. It's got originality. Nothing in it is wasted. Every frame means something. which the older I get, man, and the more things there are to watch, the more I appreciate that because God, there's some bloated shit out there. And the fact that he just gets to the point and does it in a way that's still like you had mentioned in the video, the exposition in that could have been fucking torture. But
Mhm.
because it's happening in this middle of this action sequence where the stakes are higher and you're kind of like, oh fuck, you're engaged. So yeah, give me the information, like a quick
Yeah.
download. And like, hold on, like he pushes her head down. He's like fucking shooting guns out the window. It's like that's like whoa, that's a really really good device to get that information to people. And I guess because
Mhm.
they're so involved and so worried if she's going to get killed or if they're going to get killed, you're listening intently. So it was a perfect marriage of information and attention span.
It puts the audience in the moment,
Yes.
and it literally puts them in the passenger seat.
Yeah, but I don't have the same opinion about those two movies than you. I mean, the first one, it was a pain in the ass for me to watch, and the second one is okay. But I would say it's night and day.
I grew up with this one. We had it taped from television. I watched it on VHS all the time at an extremely young age. And so when Terminator 2 came out in the summer of 1991, like I was ready. I was up to date. I was up to speed. I was like, all right, let's go. Let's see what's going to happen here. Oh, cool. The main character is a little kid. I'm a little kid. All right, I'm in it, you know. My kids have watched Terminator 2. They have
Mhm.
not watched The Terminator. And
Yeah.
there's a very clear reason for that. But I'm curious, Anne, why was it a chore for you?
It's not the kind of movie I like. First of all, what you said in the VHS is it's not a guy movie. I totally disagree on that. It's typically a guy movie because guys are, whether they are bad guys or they are the protector knight that's gonna save the blonde girl who doesn't understand anything in the story. I didn't like the main image of the woman, the Sarah Connor. I mean, she takes half of the movie to understand what's happening. It's boring. It's you have gunshots everywhere. You have needless violence. I didn't get the point. You understand the story when they're doing the car chase and Kyle. He says so fast the story during a very tension moment. You know, it's the worst dialogue in the cinema history ever. In 5 minute flat, he says everything about the future, but poor Sarah Connor, I don't get how she understand that because it's really this dialogue is bullshit. The romance is the worst romance ever. I know that you love it, Pete, but really for me, it's not romance. First of all, when you have a guy who gets completely crazy about you without knowing you because he doesn't really know her. He traveled times for her, so it's a stalker in a way, I would say. Really, that's my vision
Kyle
of it.
Reese, I'm traveling stock.
It's unhealthy the way he thinks about her. Her reaction is not real. I mean, I can understand that she's flattered that the guy traveled time for her, but then suddenly she kissed him and they make love and no, it's unreal. It's really a man who could write that because a woman would be frightened by a guy like that. Really,
Well, that's interesting because it was written by a man and a woman.
I didn't get it. I couldn't understand Sarah. Really.
Well, I'm curious now, how do you perceive the relationship between Corbin Dallas and Lilu?
No, but you can't compare that. It's so beautiful.
I
No,
think
you
I can.
but no, it's completely different because they get to know each other. Is saving her, but they gets to know each other, and they just kiss after a long journey together to save the world. So it's completely different. While them in I don't know Sarah and Kyle in a night, he just said, "Okay, I saw your picture, and I know you're the mother of the guy who's gonna save the world, and I get completely crazy about you, so I volunteer to travel the time, and now." I kiss me and we make love. No, no, no,
If
no.
he did
So
say
real.
that, that would have been the worst dialogue ever.
So yeah, I agree.
Getting back to a moment to what Anne said about the first movie and Sarah Connor is, you know, a not good character, and especially in the beginning, but like that's her arc.
Right.
And that's what makes her a great character is like, you know, what would you say? She's a typical woman who's like can't defend herself or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What'd you say, Anne?
Yeah, I don't remember what I said, but that's
Criticism?
the idea.
Right. Let's drop an unstoppable killing machine in the middle of Paris and target a random woman and see how well she takes it out. And I don't mean to lunch on her own. Like, or a man for that reason. It's not even a gender thing at this point. It's a informational thing, okay? Because the target could have very easily been a man. You saw what Arnold did to Brian Thompson in that first scene. He punched a hole right through that guy. Okay? So nobody's prepared for the Terminator. It's gender is irrelevant. And you see in the future that he's also fighting with women soldiers. Okay, so everybody's fighting, so it's not a gender thing.
Oh, I didn't see that there was a woman in the soldiers in the future. I didn't see that. Okay, so mea culpa, my fault.
Yeah.
Even when Sarah asks him about what are women like in your time, and he says, "Good fighters."
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, okay.
That's a direct quote.
I just watched it once, and I was bored half of the movie. So,
Well, I will say this about one. I know some people will disagree with me about this. The only thing to this day that bothers me about one is the perception of time and time travel. The fact that Kyle Reese is his father irks the shit out of me. Before the invention of the Terminators, you have to get to that point where John is born. So that was the only thing that always bugged the shit out of me about this movie.
It is a paradox. However, I feel like, and I hate to say this, but I feel like part of the answer might lie in Terminator Salvation and in the first film. I believe in Terminator Salvation, and again, I haven't watched that one as much, but there's an allusion to the fact that now he has to send Kyle Reese back. Whereas in the first film, if you remember, Sarah was going out on a date that night.
Yeah.
That guy very well, could have wound up being John's father. Like, it's not that Kyle is John's father. Kyle becomes John's father.
Right. And I thought about it because I easily thought about that too upon watching it again,
Yeah.
because I really try to get my head around what Cameron's thinking here. Because then
Yeah.
if you think about it that way, so let's say a random guy who cancels date would be John's father, then John wouldn't be the John that he is now, that he is in the future, to send him back. So it always bugs the shit out of me.
Yeah. It's a paradox. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's the chicken or the egg.
Yeah. The superficial thing that bugs me about Terminator 1 is that chick, Ginger, who's always wearing the headphones, even during sex. It's such a weird choice. I was like, really? Even now? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can see, okay, you're getting ready, fine. You're making a sandwich, fine. Right? Then, okay, well,
You also got to think of it like, yeah, like, okay, yeah, she's wearing the headphones all the time, but like, how many people are obsessed with their current technological toy?
yeah.
How many people are just sitting around wearing their headphones all the time or staring at their screen? So again, it's one of those things that like they saw then and it's still happening today. So it kind of bridges it. It's just
Technology is different.
yeah, the technology has evolved, which again is a theme of the film. So maybe James Cameron's a lot more prolific than we think.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. But I guess if you want to talk about the score for a second, while I don't think it's like one of the greatest scores ever.
It's one of the greatest themes ever.
Oh, I was going to say the score is effective enough for this film. I think he did a better job with the score for part 2, but
Yeah.
the theme is one of the greatest themes. If I watch the Terminator, that fucking theme is going to be in my head for the next 2 to 3 months. That's just the way that it's going to go. When I'm cooking, if I'm stirring something and I take the spoon out and I go to put it on the spoon rest to shake it off, dun, 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 there's 5 chops, and then my son will come running. He's like dun, 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 from the other room. It's just every time I clean the spoon off, it's like dun, 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 dun. I have to do it.
I remember the first time I showed this film to my wife. We were dating and we were watching, I think it was another movie and Michael Biehn was in it. And she's like, oh, he always plays a psycho. And I was like, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. And she's like, well, because she's a big fan of Tombstone and Michael Biehn plays Johnny Ringo.
Mm-hmm.
And it was another movie where he, had that twinkle in his eye. And so I was like, well, have you ever seen Aliens or the Terminator? And she hadn't. So then it's like, all right, stop in this movie. And I put Terminator in and she was like sucked right into the movie. Like she to this very day loves that movie. I remember shortly after sharing the Terminator with her, I came home from work and there was a message on my answering machine. And she's like, okay, here it goes. And then I hear the phone, like, tap, get put down. And then she starts playing the theme on the piano. She had learned it and played it on my answering machine for me. So when I got home, I could listen to it. And I still have that answering machine. I'm never throwing it away.
And that's when you went out and bought the ring.
I just wanted to say that's for me comparing the one and the two. It's like comparing Escape from New York or Escape from LA. And I checked, and Escape from New York and Terminator, the original one, it's quite the same budget. So it's interesting to compare the special effects and everything.
And now a word from our sponsor.
This podcast is brought to you by Visually Hidden Selects. If you're looking for a spoiler-free recommendation of a classic film with professional analysis and insight, check out Visually Hidden Selects, exclusively on the Visually Hidden YouTube channel.
We talked a little bit about practical effects and the tangibility of them, and the production design of a film is also just a very tangible quality and tied in with the practical locations that they were filming in. Even the club where they have their first shootout, Tech Noir, which is the dark side of technology, for those of you who weren't paying attention. It all ties in to the production design, which I just think is something that puts this film over the top. And you had mentioned that Escape from New York and Terminator had very similar budgets. They were around like 5 or 6 million, and you can see it on the screen, but you can also see the difference in the approach of the filmmakers and what they can do with that money. And I think that's fascinating as well, because Escape from New York does have a almost out of its way futuristic approach to it, whereas Terminator is grounded really in reality and contemporary reality, but the money went in different places to serve the story individually. Because it's the same amount. It's a sci-fi action film from the same era, basically speaking, but one of them focused on the time period and one of them focused on the story.
I will say this about the special effects. As primitive and rough around the edges that they might have been for the time period, I gotta be honest, the only times it looks weak, let's say, is just the full body shots of the T-800. Because some of the close-up shots, it's animatronic. It's, it's like a puppet, and that looks really good, especially when they're in the factory at the end of one and she's sitting there over Kyle Reese's body, and all of a sudden the upper torso comes to life and the eyes glow up again, and he starts crawling over Kyle's body. I mean, that's fucking nuts. That looks so good. So the close-up shots I think are really, really great. And yeah, of course, like this T-800 walking through fire at that point in time is gonna look, not as good as it can. But I mean, I could only imagine what it was like in '84 watching that in the theater. Your fucking mind's blown, right? Like this thing is just coming out of the ashes. We're kind of spoiled in the sense that, like, we've seen Thanos and the Infinity Gauntlet and all this other stuff looking pristine. But back in the day, that was the shit, so.
I'm just amazed at what was able to be accomplished in this film with the budget that they had, because the budget for Terminator 2 was approximately like $100 million. And that's practically 20 times the budget of the first film. This film was only like maybe like $5 or $6 million. And what they were able to achieve with that budget in terms of setups, locations, effects, costumes, action, the car shootout scenes, and then even the freaking massacre at the police station. They basically like destroyed the building and everybody in it. They didn't blow it up, but all those squibs and all those effects that went into that sequence, like, that's what sells it. And again, there's no computer involved in any of that.
Yeah, I agree. And talking about the budget, I wanted to say something about the budget, because we're comparing the two movies with the special effects. But also, I don't know if you know that, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he got $15 million for the second opus. So that counts in the budget, right? So when you have the first movie, 6 million budget, and the second one, just one actor, 15 million. So of course you have a bigger budget.
By that point, Arnold had become the star that we know today. Yeah. And when Terminator was happening, he was still not breaking in, but he was establishing himself. He had done Conan the Barbarian and Conan the Destroyer. and then the Terminator. And the Terminator really was like something that kind of like set him apart and pushed him into another realm. Because prior to that, Conan, he's just a gladiator running around in a loincloth. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, Arnold can do that because he was Mr. Universe 7 times and he's used to wearing a Speedo and just walking around showing his muscles. With the Terminator, the goods are under wraps, and it's really relying on his facial expression to do the acting and then his body to do the action. So it really kind of upped his game as a performer and as a star. So by the time he got to part 2, yeah, it was 7 years down the line and like at least maybe like 10 films where he was the lead. So of course the price is going to go up. And I think he also probably had profit participation in it, which again increased his salary return.
It's so hard to pin some of this stuff down because when you think, you got to put yourself in the mindset of what came out right around that time. 84 was a massive year for film, like pop culture film. You think about
Yeah.
Nightmare on Elm Street, you got Gremlins, you've got Karate Kid, you've got Ghostbusters, you've got Terminator. So even out of just those 5 films, Terminator is nothing like any of the other ones, and they're all franchises, big time franchise. So 84 was a massive, massive year pop culturally.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing about Terminator that we're probably going to dive into here, is that it was groundbreaking in a lot of ways. I think it paved the way for definitely for Arnold to be that big action hero that we know him as today.
Yes, Arnold is the star. He's the title character. He's the star. But my feeling is that Michael Biehn is really carrying it. He's the one who's selling it to the audience. This is really, in my opinion, it's Michael Bihn's movie.
I agree with that. He's definitely the guy carrying the bag here, right? He's got the whole thing on his back. It's one of those weird things that's like, you can't have one without the other, right? Like, he's definitely carrying the load here, but Arnold being that presence is kind of pushing him to do, to do that, like, because he's such a massive human being and he's such a presence. I mean, let's face it. So I think that's very helpful. But you're right. I mean, as far as who the star of the film is, I mean, yeah, it's probably Michael Biehn.
I totally agree that the actors are great. And I would say that Linda Hamilton is a bit better in the second opus than the first, but she's good. But I was surprised that even Arnold Schwarzenegger, he does really great in the first movie because he doesn't have many lines. It's surprising. He doesn't talk much. And yeah, he does the job, yeah, I was really impressed. And Michael Biehn does a pretty good Stalker. So yeah. I don't really like James Cameron, but I admit that he's good in his casting most of the time. I don't really have a movie in mind where the casting is a catastrophe. He always does great.
Did you know that Arnold was originally considered for Kyle Reese?
Yeah, which would have been a completely different. It wouldn't have worked.
They originally wanted Lance Henriksen to be the Terminator, and then they were also considering O.J. Simpson to be the Terminator, and they felt that nobody would believe that O.J. Simpson could kill a person.
Which is the funniest fucking thing in the universe, right?
And then Arnold met with James Cameron just as like a courtesy, and Arnold was talking about the character of the Terminator, and then James Cameron kind of realized, like, well, you seem to really understand this character, maybe you should be the Terminator. And then it opened up Kyle Reese.
That goes back to that thing that I always stand by, is the actor needs to have a self-awareness. He wouldn't be able to pull off all the monologues and all the emotion and all that stuff at that time.
Maybe the genius isn't James Cameron. Maybe the genius is Arnold Schwarzenegger.
That's right. I firmly believe that. Like, just knowing that you're right for something or not right for something, and taking your feelings off the table about how much you'd want to play the role, makes all the difference in the world. And kudos to Arnold for having that foresight to realize that he's not Kyle Reese. He probably wouldn't have had the career that he had.
In Conan, he doesn't say a whole lot. And in the Terminator, he doesn't say a whole lot. But like, playing to his strengths, he's just a mastermind in that regard. And so here's this character who doesn't have a lot of dialogue, but he's supposed to be this machine and this big, unstoppable presence. Well, I can be a big unstoppable presence, and I don't want to say a whole lot of shit. So let's go that way. What about that?
One of my favorite moments in the original Terminator for Arnold, where I totally buy that he is a cyborg. It's going to sound ridiculous and crazy, but after the shootout at the police station, Kyle and Sarah get in the car. They speed away. He jumps the railing, and as he's walking away, and that's like dun dun dun, and the music's playing, he hits the corner of the building, and he does this turn motion with his head, and then his body turns. It's like his head first, then his body, and that sells it. That to me is where you see the performance in the Terminator. You don't even see his face, but his head turns first, then his body turns, and he goes with the gun.
Mm-hmm. And it's those little character nuances that are so easy to take for granted and so easy to like overlook and write off the film.
What you just said makes me think of what we said during the previous podcast about silent movies, that some actors are really great in that, and maybe nowadays actors, they're not really they really need dialogues these days. Not all of them, not all actors, but that's how you can find a great actor. He can says a lot without talking much. I was impressed by this performance of Arnold Schwarzenegger just for that, but I was surprised when you said that he was initially seen as Kyle because of his accent. Yeah, it would have sounded weird to have a Germanic accent.
Right, but now think about this. Who does the most talking in Terminator 2?
It's Arnold.
It's Arnold. And he's the good guy protecting. So
Yeah.
he basically did become Kyle Reese
Yeah.
in the second one.
Yeah, he did. Right, which is hilarious. But the other moment in Terminator, I think, where I buy, aside from like obviously when he's got the metal sticking out, the special effects in his face, when he goes to the house of the first Sarah Connor, and she opens the door and she's peeking through the chain. He's like, yes. He's like, Sarah Connor, and she's like, yes. And the way his eyes change, it was like the target was locked. It was like, kill mode, and then just kick that door open. The slow motion in that is always so creepy. Like his like crazy stoic face, and like the door's like it pops open and it's just like moving in slow motion. That I love that shit, man. It looks so good. But
another really, really good and subtle touch to the character is the scene in the gun store when he's asking for all the weapons, and then he says phase plasma rifle with a 40-watt range. And he's like, just what you see on the shelf, pal. It's like, it's not that the Terminator wanted that gun. It's he wanted to make sure that gun didn't exist, because that's the thing that could probably kill him in the future. Right. That's probably what the soldiers are using. So he wanted to make sure that he was safe, and then he could move on with his mission.
I didn't get
that doesn't exist here.
Interesting.
And this guy doesn't have one under the counter.
Also, I love to see Dick Miller pop up in anything. I love that guy, man. So such a nice little spot for him. And I always forget he's in it because it's just such a quick exchange. But yeah, I again, like I was saying before, as I get older, I don't want to see something that's overblown and bloated with a bunch of nothingness. I think he's so economical, which is not just what you see in the frame as far as the pacing and the timing of everything, but yeah, just maximizing every moment of the film to get the greatest possible impact and outcome. I think I'm always impressed by that. How someone can take something like, a relatively small budget, right, and create something that's lasted. We're going to be talking about it 40 years now, right? It's 40-year anniversary of this movie this year, and we're still talking about it. And it's still, and they've made, a bunch of sequels and video games and toys and, and I'll Be Back and Hasta La Vista. All those things are like in like the lexicon of pop culture forever, So the fact that he accomplished what he did with what he had at that point in time, where effects were, especially computer effects, were on the very primitive side of things. That's a testament. I am always in awe of people who can do that kind of thing. And I have a question for you. Do you think now, after hearing me and Pete go on about this, do you think that you will go back and watch The Terminator again?
To be frank right now, I'm not sure, except if I have really nothing to watch. But no, it's still not something I'm really really happy to have to watch.
All right, well, go watch Terminator Genesis, and then you're gonna be like, whoa, Terminator was a fucking masterpiece.
But you know what? Maybe I'm gonna try to watch the saga, because the franchise. I'm curious about it now. I didn't really like the second opus. I mean, I said it's okay, but I'm curious to see what goes next.
Well, yeah, if you do go through the series and then you go back to 1 and 2, I think you're going to have kind of a Jaws 3 experience here where it's like, "Oh shit, that's what bad is." Oh, I get it. I see the light.
and
Oh,
and to be clear,
give me more of that, please.
Arnold is great in all of them because he's excellent as this character.
I think that about does it for us here today at the Visually Hidden Selects podcast. We'll be talking about a brand new film next time, so be sure to check out our YouTube channel and subscribe so you don't miss any of that. You can catch Stephen Bendler over at Steve's Pop Culture Corner on Instagram, Anne and I, of course, are also on Instagram as well as Letterboxd, so you can see what we've been watching and check out what we think over there. And until next time, hasta la vista, baby.